All right, let's talk about something that's literally all around you, but you might not even think about it. It's in your kitchen, it's inside your own body, and yeah, it's even in a nasty bee sting. We're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden world of acids and bases.
Okay, so what do a lemon, an upset stomach, and a bee sting all have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really weird joke, right? But seriously, what's the connection between these totally random things?
Well, the answer is they're all part of this invisible chemical world of acids and bases. Think about it. That sour pucker from a lemon? That's acid. The burning feeling from indigestion? That's stomach acid. And that painful welt from a bee sting? You guessed it, acid. Let's dive a little deeper.
So let's start with what we already know. You can actually begin to figure this stuff out just by using your senses. I mean, some of the most basic properties of acids and bases are things you've probably come across your entire life without even realizing it.
Okay, so on the one hand, you've got acids. These are things like lemons and vinegar, and they have that classic sour taste. Then you've got bases. They tend to taste bitter and feel kind of slippery or soapy, like baking soda or an actual bar of soap. Now, and this is a big but, please do not go around taste testing things to see if they're an acid or a base. Seriously, that's a terrible idea. Luckily, there's a much, much safer way to tell them apart.
Yeah, so since tasting unknown chemicals is a huge no-no, chemists have this really cool trick up their sleeves. They use these little chemical spies that change color to do the detective work for them, revealing the true identity of a substance, acid or base.
And these spies have a name. They're called indicators. An indicator is just something that changes color when it touches an acid or a base. It's how we see the invisible. And the most famous one, the one you probably heard about in school, is litmus.
And it's super straightforward. Blue litmus paper turns red if it touches an acid. Red litmus paper turns blue in a base. Simple. But get this, you probably have an indicator in your kitchen right now. Turmeric. Ever get a curry stain on a white shirt? What happens when you try to wash it out with soap? That yellow stain turns this kind of reddish-brown color, right? That's because soap is a base, and the turmeric is acting as an indicator. Pretty cool, huh? And it's not always about color either. Sure, you've got natural indicators like red cabbage juice and lab-made synthetic ones, but then there are olfactory indicators, which is a fancy way of saying they change their smell. How wild is that? Like, if you take chopped up onions and add a base, they actually lose that strong oniony smell. It just disappears.
Okay, so we know how to spot an acid or a base. That's cool. But the really interesting part, the real action, is what happens when they start interacting with other things. All right, first up, the classic showdown, acid versus metal. When these two meet, something very specific and very predictable always goes down.
So you drop some metal, like these little pieces of zinc, into some acid. Immediately, you see it start to fizz and bubble. But those aren't just air bubbles. Nope, that is flammable hydrogen gas. The acid is literally eating away at the metal and releasing this gas in the process.
And there's a simple rule for this every single time. Acid plus metal gives you two things, a salt and hydrogen gas. And when we say salt, we don't just mean table salt, it's a whole category of chemicals. So that's one rule down. But what happens when an acid meets its total opposite, a base?
This brings us to a huge concept in chemistry called neutralization. And honestly, the name says it all. It's when an acid and a base get together and just cancel each other out. They nullify each other's powers. This is exactly what's happening when you take an antacid for heartburn. Your stomach has too much acid, so you swallow a base to neutralize it.
And you know what you're left with? Something so simple. A base plus an acid just gives you salt and plain old water. It's amazing, right? You take two pretty reactive things, mix them, and you end up with two of the most stable, neutral things around. Okay, so we know how they taste, how they feel, how they react. But we still haven't gotten to the biggest question. Why? What's the secret sauce? What's the one thing that actually makes an acid in the first place?
Well, the secret ingredient is something called an ion. For acids, it's all about the hydrogen ion. When you put an acid in water, it breaks apart and releases these tiny, positively charged hydrogen ions. We call them H+ ions. And it's these little guys floating around that can carry electricity. That's why the light bulb in this setup is glowing. Releasing those H+ ions, that is the defining feature of an acid. And for bases, they do something similar, but they release hydroxide ions, or OH-.
But here's the catch, and it's a really important one. An acid can't really do its thing without water. A totally dry acid just sits there.
it won't release its hydrogen ions, so it won't act like an acid at all. You need water to, activate it. Water is the key that unlocks its true acidic power.
Now, speaking of mixing acid and water, we have to talk about safety for a second. This is super important. When you mix them, it creates a lot of heat. So the rule is you always add the acid slowly to the water, never the other way around. If you pour water into concentrated acid, it can heat up so fast that it literally boils and splashes dangerous acid right into your face. Just remember the saying, do as you oughta, add acid to water.
Okay, it's pretty obvious that not all acids are the same, right? I mean, there's a huge difference between the acid in a lemon and something like battery acid. Some are weak, some are incredibly strong. So how do we actually measure that difference?
The answer is the pH scale. You've probably heard of it. It's basically a ruler for acidity, running from 0 to 14. All it's doing is measuring how many of those hydrogen ions are floating around. A low number, down near 0, means it's super acidic. A high number, up near 14, means it's very basic or alkaline. And smack dab in the middle is 7. That's perfectly neutral. Think pure water. Now, why should you care about this number?
Well, for one thing, your own body has to stay within this unbelievably tiny pH range just to keep you alive. We're talking about a super narrow window. Life itself depends on keeping that pH perfectly balanced. It's an incredibly delicate act.
And here's another one that hits even closer to home, your teeth. As soon as the pH in your mouth dips below 5.5, your tooth enamel, which is the hardest stuff in your entire body, starts to dissolve. That's literally what tooth decay is. It's acid made by bacteria from the sugar you eat, destroying your teeth.
So, you see, from the chemistry inside our own cells, to the health of our teeth, to whether fish can survive in a lake, life as we know it is completely dependent on this delicate pH balance. So that brings me to a final, mind-bending question. We know the atmosphere on the planet Venus is choked with clouds of pure sulfuric acid. Now that you know how vital pH balance is for life, what do you think that means for the odds of finding anything alive on a planet like that? It really makes you think about how fundamental this hidden chemistry is, not just here, but everywhere.